So Anne named her house in the woods with Diana. She called it Idlewild. And that's a name that pops up a whole bunch of different places. And I wondered if some of those places were named after the book, where, Anne of Green Gables and her Idlewild inspired other names. And it turns out that that's not the case. There is an amusement park in Pennsylvania near Ligonier called Idlewild. And that's been around since the 1800s. And since this book was written in 1908, it's obviously not responsible for the name Idlewild there. Another Idlewild that was just kind of simmering around in my brain was Idlewild Airport, which is in New York City and is now called JFK. So there was Idlewild Airport in New York. Anyway, so those are the different names of Idlewild, and it's just a nice sounding name. And idle, IDLE, means to sit and do nothing, or to not do anything. So if you have a motor that's running but not really running hard and driving a load, it's said to be idling. Someone who just sits around is said to be idling. And wild, on the other hand, is untamed and free. So you have Idlewild, so you have someone who's resting and free, which is a great name, and it sounds nice. Now, Anne and Diana's house was just a spot in the woods that they kind of cleared the brush away from, and they put up a shelf and they put little bits of broken glass there. And the piece of fairy glass was described as being from a lamp. So often you have intricate cut glass as part of lamps and such. Not as much anymore because it's not the style right now, but it was the style for a long time. It'll probably be the style again soon, where you would have these crystals of glass with nice sharp edges, and what happens is the light hits it, and because glass has a higher index of refraction than light, and that varies with the color, you have some colors bent more than others. So you have red bent a lot and yellow bent more, until you have blue not bent much at all. So you have this prism. It's just like a prism. I'm sure I've discussed this before. But anyway, so you'd have this bit of glass that was hanging from a lamp, and the light from the lamp shines through the glass. It causes pretty rainbows. So that was their fairy glass. They had a broken plate. Some of it was pretty and decorated. Yes, haha. Thank you, Lolli. So it was much like this sort of thing. You can see the pretty colors dancing. That's partially due to a coating on the edge, which on the outside of this, which amplifies the color patterns. But this casts lovely rainbows with direct light. Thank you. And the other thing I wanted to talk about was patchwork. So at this point in time, there was a surge in manufacturing. And because there was this surge in manufacturing, where, you had the Industrial Revolution come along, and all of a sudden, there was more fabric than ever. This allowed people to take bits of fabric that were extra and actually use them for something just sort of decorative, as opposed to using every little bit, which is why you had the sleeves that Anne wanted. Anne wanted the puff sleeves. Well, puff sleeves became a thing because all of a sudden they had fabric for it. And Anne talked about not liking the patchwork because it wasn't creative. The thing is that patchwork can be very, very creative, because you take a design and you cut out different colored pieces and you stitch it together. But Anne and Marilla, it was just, okay, we are cutting apart the red and the yellow. And this is a quilt that Lolli made. If you're to take a look at all of those tiny little pieces in there, and this took her months and months to make. It was a lot of hard work. And there's these little tiny pieces. And there's actually this fabric here, Lolli had made special because she was trying to find the fabric that was used in this reproduction quilt used in a quilt that looked just like this down in Lancaster, and she couldn't find the fabric because it hadn't been made for hundreds of years, or for 100 years. So what Lolli did was she went on Spoonflower, which is a website where you can order printed fabric and do it. Oh wow, yes. Look at this one. This block is just intense. It looks like, they make fabric that's printed like this, but no. This little block here is like a centimeter on a side, and another one is a centimeter on a side, and this one's 2 by 1. And so Lolli made all of these little squares, little teeny tiny squares. I mean, it's more seam allowance than block. And she sewed them all together, and then she sewed them all together into this, and then she cut it out. But this was the sort of thing that Anne was complaining about doing. And this one here is something called applique, where you have the big diamond here, and each of these things are little pieces which are sewn on top. So what you do is you take the edge and you fold it down and you sew it. Then you fold the edge down and you sew it, and you sew it, and you go around in a circle all the way around the piece. So you have this long bit here that was all sewn on, and then the red leaves on top. And so this is a quilt that Lolli made that was actually in a book. So a woman did a book about the Lancaster diamond quilt, which is the name of that quilt. And she was looking for people who did it, and Lolli sent her pictures of her completed quilt, and that ended up in this book. So Lolli's quilt made it into a book about the quilt. Oh. That's her quilt in the book, which is so cool. And the other quilt that Lolli brought over.
This is the original quilt.
Okay. Which is the top.
Yeah.
So that's the original quilt, and Lolli's quilt looks very, very much like it because Lolli worked really hard to make sure it matched. And this is a quilt that was made by my mom. And she went and she pieced this together, and this is all heavy fabric. So this wasn't really a special quilt. It's something called a 9-patch. Because
Right here. You got this one.
Which one?
Right here. Well, this one's probably easier to see.
Yeah.
Other way.
So you have this 9 squares, and it alternates dark, bright, dark, bright, dark. And so it alternates these colors. And so you take 9 pieces, 5 of one, 4 of the other, and you sew them together. And then you sew other sets together, and you can just take these 9 squares and you sew them together until you get this big quilt. And this quilt is made out of very heavy fabric. It's actually upholstery fabric. This was the sofa that my parents had. And so, this was the sofa, and there were other things that, there were other fabrics that, I just recognized from around the house. And these were As I said, this is upholstery fabric. This is stuff that's durable and lasts a long time. And so this quilt was just meant to be used. So this wasn't like a fancy showy quilt like the one that Lolli made, which is made to be displayed. This was a quilt that you just sleep with. It keeps you warm. But
Picnics.
it's picnics.
We did it to put the back
Yep.
so it wouldn't show grass stains.
Yep. Yeah. Oh no. Thumbs up on that one. I don't. Anyway, no, that was a quilt that my mom made, and yeah,
Patchwork.
that's Patchwork.